The moment my parents said I would always come last, something inside me quietly clicked into place. I still remember the exact tone my mother used that night, calm, practiced, almost kind, when she said, "Your sister's family always comes first." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. Those words had been rehearsed for years in smaller moments, missed birthdays, canceled plans, calls that came only when someone needed something. I sat at the dining table, my hands folded around a mug that had already gone cold, and waited for the sentence to end. It didn't. My father cleared his throat and added, "You understand. You're alone. They have responsibilities. Alone." The word echoed louder than the rest. My sister didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just smiled, small, sharp, satisfied. A smirk that told me she'd known this verdict long before I did. I heard myself say, "Good to know," and even surprised myself with how steady my voice sounded. Inside, though, something shifted. Not anger. Not tears. Clarity. That night, lying awake in my apartment, I replayed years of being the backup plan. I thought about the savings account I'd quietly built, the promotions I'd never celebrated loudly, the habit of saying yes before anyone even asked. I opened my laptop and created new folders: finances, insurance, legal. It felt dramatic, almost silly, but also grounding. I separated accounts, redirected automatic payments, reviewed documents I'd ignored because I trusted family to be family. Over the next weeks, I noticed patterns I'd been too loyal to see before. Calls from my parents often came right after my sister mentioned money troubles. Invitations appeared when school fees were due or repairs needed. I didn't confront anyone. I just observed. I started saying, "Let me think about it," instead of yes. Each time, there was a pause on the other end of the line, as if they were recalculating. One afternoon, while organizing old papers, I found a folder labeled with my name in my father's handwriting. Inside were copies of documents I didn't remember sharing. Loan applications. Guarantees. Some pages were unsigned, some weren't. My stomach tightened. Why did they have these? Why now? I took photos, put everything back exactly as it was, and said nothing. That night, my sister called, cheerful, asking casual questions about my work, my savings, my plans. The word plans lingered strangely. I answered vaguely, listening more than speaking. When the call ended, I realized my hands were shaking. I wasn't sure yet what game was being played, only that I'd been on the board far longer than I knew. The emergency came quietly, dressed as concern. My mother called early in the morning, her voice tight, breath uneven. She said there had been an accident, nothing fatal, but serious enough to require immediate money. Hospital fees. Legal complications. She didn't ask directly. She never did. She just explained, layer by layer, until the conclusion hovered in the air between us. I told her I needed details. That alone earned me silence. When she spoke again, the warmth was gone. By noon, my sister messaged me a list, amounts, deadlines, account numbers, sent with the confidence of someone who expected compliance. I read it 3 times. The numbers were larger than before, urgent enough to scare, vague enough to question. I asked for documents. Reports. Receipts. My sister replied with a single line, "Don't make this difficult." That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house unannounced. The familiar walls felt different, like a stage set I'd finally walked behind. Papers were spread across the table, some genuine, some suspiciously clean. I noticed dates that didn't align, signatures that looked rushed. When I asked questions, answers overlapped, contradicted, then ended in irritation. My father avoided my eyes. My mother kept saying, "Family helps family." I nodded, outwardly calm, inwardly connecting dots. In the hallway, I overheard my sister on the phone, whispering urgently, mentioning my name and the word approved. Approved by whom? That night, back home, I pulled out the photos I'd taken weeks earlier. I compared them with what I'd seen. Similar amounts. Similar institutions. A pattern emerged, unsettling and deliberate. I realized this wasn't a single emergency. It was the continuation of a system where my role had already been assigned. I checked my accounts, my credit history, my records. Nothing had been taken, yet. But attempts had been made. Soft attempts, testing boundaries. I slept poorly, dreams tangled with memories of childhood promises and adult obligations. The next morning, I received a message from an unfamiliar number asking me to confirm financial responsibility. My heart pounded, but my mind was clear. Whatever was unfolding wasn't just about money. It was about expectations, entitlement, and a version of me they assumed would never say no. I didn't respond. Instead, I scheduled appointments, made calls, and quietly prepared. The emergency was real enough to scare them, but the truth behind it felt deeper, messier, and far from over. By the time I sat across from the bank advisor, I understood something important. Fear had always been their strongest tool, and silence had been mine. I laid out every document, every message, every unexplained request. The advisor's expression shifted slowly from polite neutrality to concern. He explained what I had already begun to suspect. Multiple attempts had been made to link my name to liabilities without my direct consent. Not successfully, but persistently. Someone had assumed I would eventually sign, approve, or simply not notice. Walking out of the building, I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because the truth was no longer trapped in my head. Heavier because family was now officially part of the problem. That evening, my parents called again. This time, there was pressure in their voices, sharpened by time. Bills were due. Deadlines were non-negotiable. I asked calmly why documents with my name had been prepared weeks before the so-called emergency. Silence stretched, then my mother accused me of being paranoid. My sister took the phone and told me I was being selfish, that I'd changed, that success had made me cold. I almost laughed at the irony. Changed? No. I had simply stopped disappearing. Over the next days, tension escalated. Messages turned demanding. Guilt became their language of choice, reminding me of sacrifices, of childhood, of blood. I listened without interrupting, noting how none of them answered my actual questions. Then came the threat disguised as disappointment. My father said if I didn't help, relationships would suffer. I replied quietly that they already had. That was the first time my voice truly felt like my own. Behind the scenes, I continued preparing. I froze certain permissions, documented everything, and followed legal advice step by step. Each action felt surreal, like I was playing a role I never auditioned for. One night, my sister showed up at my door, eyes red, anger barely contained. She accused me of ruining everything, of choosing money over family. I asked her why my money had always been family money, but her husband's never was. She had no answer, only tears that came too late. When she left, I didn't feel victorious. I felt resolved. The mystery wasn't just about missing money or false emergencies anymore. It was about how long they'd planned for me to be the solution without ever asking if I agreed to the problem. The final confrontation didn't happen in a dramatic room or with raised voices. It happened over a long table, papers neatly arranged, truth finally unavoidable. I invited my parents and sister to meet with a mediator present. They arrived defensive, confident I'd fold once emotions were involved. Instead, I let the facts speak. Timelines. Attempts. Contradictions. The mediator asked questions I'd been asking for years, only now they couldn't be ignored. My parents looked smaller somehow, cornered by their own assumptions. My sister broke first, admitting they'd counted on me eventually agreeing, because I always had before. Hearing it out loud was both painful and freeing. I explained, calmly, that I wasn't abandoning them. I was simply stepping out of a role I'd never consented to. I would help in ways that were transparent, fair, and chosen, not demanded, not assumed. Anything else was manipulation, not family. The room was quiet after that. No one argued, because there was nothing left to argue with. The emergency still existed, but now it had to be handled honestly, collectively, without using me as a silent guarantee. Weeks later, life felt different. Quieter. Some relationships cooled, others adjusted awkwardly, but none returned to the old pattern. I learned that being last for so long had taught me something powerful, how to stand alone without falling apart. When my mother eventually called just to ask how I was, no requests attached, I knew things had changed. Not perfectly. Not painlessly. But permanently. I hadn't frozen them with revenge or cruelty. I'd frozen the expectations that had kept me small. And for the first time, I wasn't last anymore, not even in my own story.